Okay. Members, welcome to the Health and Human Services Finance and Policy for Tuesday, May 12th at 3 p.m. For the record, we do have a quorum. And members, we are going to take Senate File 4500 off the table. If you remember last time, the language was amended with language that had originated in the House, is to give us a broad look at what testing would look like. And there's been a lot of information, let's say, floating about, but I want to be clear with everybody who's watching this and who's interested in this. We do want a testing program in the state of Minnesota so that people can safely return to work. But we also want strong privacy protection so that people always know that their data, their health information is their health information, and they can share that as they choose to share it. And I believe that Minnesotans will make good choices about sharing that information for public health purposes. And so with that, members, I know that we have posted some amendments. I believe Senator Abler has the first amendment, and we're not going to just rush through these things. We are going to have a robust debate because clarity about what a Minnesota testing program looks like is our responsibility. And so, Senator Abler.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes.
Is my audio okay now on this one?
Your audio is fine. Thank you, Senator Abler, for checking.
Yeah, thank you. So I'd like to move the A11 amendment, and I'll describe it. And I hopefully it'll be favorable to the committee. We had I think a good meeting last week, and this whole Zoom thing is so weird. You don't get to look at each other across the table and have side conversations. And I think on bills like this in particular, I think that are complicated and maybe a little controversial, I really miss some of that and actually going and talking to somebody in the audience. And so doing the best that with that caveat. So as we chatted with the department about their plans to do this contact tracing, there was a lot of uncertainty about the size and even maybe the scope and the goals and when would they be done with it. And I think a valid series of discussions, and I think Senator Benson, you've laid it out pretty well. We want people to be safe at work. We want to reopen safely. We want to help people not be ill, particularly in the high-risk places. And so, and in the middle of all that, I sensed a great deal of concern from me and a number of people about privacy rights, the right to say no. What happens to that if you just don't want to be tested? And I totally understand that. You get your name in the system, and we're used to privacy and so on. Anyway, so the A11 goes through. I'll just walk through it. The first page is mostly definitions, and it focuses on a high-risk site where the risks are at, where people are dying and coming to harm, is healthcare facilities, long-term care facilities, assisted living facilities, congregate living settings, food processing facilities, critical infrastructure sites, and then schools, and then correctional facilities. And that would be the focus that we're interested in. And it says if the commissioner establishes a program, then there is some rights that people have. This amendment does not establish a program. I have a strong sense that the Department of Health can set up a program without our help anyway, and the governor has been kind of want to do all kinds of things through his executive orders anyway. But it sets up a Bill of Rights, and basically it's on page 2, and it says that you get to consent, and if you don't want to be a part of the tracing system, you don't have to do that. You have your relatives get to be private. If there's a vendor, they have to apply by that privacy. That these are Minnesota health record level of privacy, and that the employer has to maintain that as well. It says that the data is private, and it talks about if you refuse, you aren't necessarily liable to be quarantined. I have an A14 amendment that will modify that, so I'll just kind of skip over that for now. And it says an employer can do their own testing. It says health workers who are furloughed or on unpaid leave could actually be used for this, compared to hiring random individuals, and then that they're not going to be punished at work if they want to be a part of this. And then we give some grants to small employers. The amendment will make it 100 employees or less, and I was thinking $5 million a year. So, Madam Chair, if I may, maybe I'll just offer the A11 to get the amendment in the order, which I think would be worthy of discussion, and then I'll stand for any comments or questions.
So, Senator Abler, did you mean the A14 to amend
I'm sorry, yeah. So,
the
I'll move the
A11?
A11 to get it in front of us, and then I'll move the A14 to the A11, and I can describe that now if that would be good.
So you would like to amend the A11, which is in front of us and we haven't adopted. We did adopt the A2 when we met last. So the A11 deletes the A2, and that is in front of us. We haven't moved on it. You'd like to move the A14 amendment to the A11. Is that correct?
Correct, Madam Chair.
Okay.
And I guess I can incorporate it, but I want to describe it. So I think it's the sort of amendment people would like. So, but anyway, so what it does about 4 things. On page 2, we discovered as we were trying to provide protections for the workers that we were trudging too far into employment law, and we were kind of over our head, and then we were wondering what the impact of that would be. And so we're just taking out section 6 on page 2, where it just wasn't workable. So that would be deleted. And a similar way, line 3.11 to 3.13, which is paragraph B on subdivision 4, which again runs into employment law, I think far beyond our ability to sort that out. And then it modifies, just to back up on the top of page, those are the deletions. On the top of page 3, it adds in the term asymptomatic individual if they're in the middle of a screening. And so it actually narrows who is protected, I think, but I think it's still a reasonable way. If you just don't want to be screened and you're asymptomatic, they can't quarantine you for that purpose only. And then finally, on the page 4, it puts the grants to small employers. So with 100 employees or less, I figured the big companies can sort that out. I think the ones most at risk for trying to sort this, how to handle this, are going to be the small ones. So, and so I think I'll, Madam Chair, should I just incorporate it, or do you want to discuss?
I think we should have, we need to let the committee vote on putting the A14 into the A11 and then discuss the A11 as amended. Sure. So members, let's unmute and open up your video. And I see hands raised. So I see Senator Eaton, and okay, let's start with Senator Marty. This is to the A14 that amends the A11.
Madam Chair, I was just going to ask, I mean, incorporating this into the A11, I don't have a problem with that. I may have problems with A11. I'm not sure whether this amendment is a plus or not, but if, in other words, if A11 is the amendment he wants to offer us with this part of it, I don't mind treating it as sort of his getting his amendment in the shape he wants to offer it in.
Okay, thank you, Senator Marty. Senator Eaton.
Thank you. My concern with the A14 is that if you cannot quarantine someone who is asymptomatic, but what if they live with somebody who has tested positive? Or what if, I mean, they've been in contact with a positive tested person? Then you have to allow that risk into your workplace. I really have a problem with that.
So, Madam Chair.
Senator Eaton, I don't think it would just be into the workplace. I think it would be in public in general. So Senator Abler to Senator Eaton's question.
Well, and I respect your concern, although actually the amendment has the effect of limiting who can be excused from quarantine. So the way it was drafted, I think Senator Marty might have just been right just to take it up that way. But if you read the existing amendment, if you just simply refuse, you couldn't be quarantined. You have to be a little more healthy in this case. So this moves more your direction, Senator Eaton, just so you know.
So, Senator Eaton, as you look at the A14 insertion of asymptomatic and refusing the screening, so are you generally supportive of moving that direction, or is your concern more about the base language of the A1 and the A14 doesn't fix your concern?
The latter.
Okay. And so, Senator Eaton, if we don't put on the A14 amendment, then the A11, page 3, line 1 through 4, actually is broader authority. You could not. I have serious concerns about how we're cross-referencing our quarantine policy here. So I respect and understand that, Senator Eaton. Senator Marty, your hand is still up. Okay, thank you. Senator Nelson, your hand is up. For the A14, Senator Nelson?
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Well, actually, this is a little bit of a baseline question. I think it's essential to know what our current laws are regarding testing, quarantine, contact tracing. None of these things are new. They have been done. They are being done. I can remember most recently the Ebola cases. And so I think it's just a little concerning to me. I'd like to know what the current law says regarding these issues, and if there are some holes in our current law, they should be identified. But right now, it seems like this might be a little bit, maybe not duplicative, but also maybe conflicting. I just don't know. And it would be really helpful to have staff give us a review of what current law is regarding contact tracing, regarding testing, and because we require testing for a number of different things. And also, as we get into this further, what are employer rights versus employee rights? Can an employer mandate that if somebody's going to be working for him or her, they do need to have a test? I think we do that for other things. And I'm just curious how this amendment lines up with that. So I'd like to have that broader discussion, Madam Chair, to have an intelligent vote on these amendments.
Okay, thank you. And so maybe Mr. Huff is comfortable going through our current quarantining laws. And members, for reference, I believe most of you are on your laptops, but 144.419 as referenced here and 144.4196 are the governing statutes. So, Mr. Huff.
Madam Chair, Senators, good afternoon. Happy to provide an overview of how the Health Department conducts its work around testing and contact tracing. First of all, we do not order people to get tested. Someone can refuse to be tested if they so choose. We have reportable diseases, and COVID, or the SARS-CoV-2 virus, is a reportable disease. That means that if someone tests positive for the virus, then that information is provided to the Minnesota Department of Health so that we may conduct our public health response. All data that is collected by the Minnesota Department of Health is governed by the Minnesota Data Practices Act. We at MDH believe very much in upholding the trust that the public have placed in us in safeguarding their data. So we not only comply with every bit of the letter of the law, but absolutely the intent of the law in protecting individuals' data. When we conduct contact tracing, so what happens when we get a case of a reportable disease, we follow up with that individual. And we call them and we identify ourselves as a staff member from the Minnesota Department of Health and ask if we can ask them some questions. And we provide a Tennyson warning at that point. And anyone is absolutely within their right to decline an interview with MDH staff. But if they accept our interview,
Mr. Huff, what happens if they, at each of these points, I think it would be really helpful for the committee and I think for the public watching to understand what happens if someone declines to be interviewed, because that's really where people get nervous. I think they think that there's this huge power and they're losing all their rights. And to some extent, the government does have an unusual set of powers when we're dealing with contagious diseases, but people need to understand what happens if they say no. A lot of people, you said yourself, a lot of people don't like to answer the phone when the state of Minnesota calls. And so help us understand both sides of this conversation. I think that's going to be really important if we're going to have trust rebuilt.
Madam Chair, absolutely. So if you decide to not be interviewed, that's your right. Now, we do have under 144.4195, that does give the commissioner the authority to isolate and quarantine either infected or individuals who are exposed to someone who's infected. Now, that is in the memory of everyone in the health department, has not ever been invoked. We always work with folks to have voluntary compliance with that. A few things that are in that law, if that were to be invoked, where we require someone to isolate or require someone to quarantine, it has to be a commissioner's order. The commissioner has to notify the governor, has to notify the Senate majority and Senate minority leader, has to notify the House majority and House minority leader. And within 72 hours, we must apply for that in a court of law. So it is not a light thing that we would go into. And in fact, as I said, no one in the history of the department in memory has invoked that. That is the authority, however, in statute. The reason for that authority is if we have someone who willfully wants to spread the disease that they are infected with, that allows us to confine that person so that they do not infect and spread a contagious disease to the public. So it is there for a reason. And fortunately, we've not had to use it in our memory. But going back to when someone receives our call, they can refuse that. But if they welcome our call, then we ask them about their disease. We ask them about their symptoms. We ask them when do those symptoms first start. What that does is it helps us get an idea of when they might have been contagious. So, for example, COVID, usually it takes between 3 and 10 days for symptoms to exhibit themselves. So we would ask somebody, okay, think about when your symptoms occurred. And we could assume then that they were infected anytime 3 to 10 days before. And what we want to do is find out, how did they get infected? What contacts did they have with people? Do they know of someone that they were in contact with that was sick? Were they in contact with anyone that had been tested for COVID? Then we talk to them about who their contacts are. Now, this is not a casual contact. It's not, I checked out in the grocery store. It's rather, these are contacts that I've had. Usually we think of over 30 minutes of contact closer than 6 feet. We want to know who those contacts are because we want to be able to call them and say, hey, you've been in contact with someone who has tested positive for COVID. We do not disclose who that person is. It is absolutely private. So you have no idea if I were to call you from the health department and say you've been in contact with someone, you don't know who that is. We don't tell you when it happened or how it happened. We just let you know that that has happened and that we ask you to go get tested and we ask you to quarantine yourself. There's often a lot of questions about that, as you can imagine. That's not a fun conversation to hear, but it is important. And we let people know how contagious the disease is, how it's really important that they stay at home. Do they have adequate supplies at home? Do they need someone to provide food for them? We connect them with our local public health departments to make sure that their basic needs are met. Do they have the food they need, the medical care they need? As you can imagine, it's really important. If I were to visit my parents, for example, and I had been in contact with someone who was infected, I would want to make sure I stay at home because I don't want to deliver groceries to my parents if I know I might be at higher risk. So that's an important part of that's why we do contact tracing. So what we do is we find all the different contacts of that person. We contact them, interview them, find out if they have symptoms, ask them to self-quarantine, and ask them to get tested. This is why testing is important. Testing without contact tracing is pretty much worthless because we don't have much clinical treatment. So knowing that you're positive for COVID doesn't necessarily change your medical outcome until we have treatment for it, effective treatment. The purpose of testing is so that you know to isolate and we can contact those people who've been in contact with you to make sure that they isolate. This is how we stop the spread of the disease. Otherwise, we have to rely upon these very difficult, socially difficult, economically difficult mitigation measures where we have people stay at home and not engage in commerce. So the contact tracing is a really important measure for us to strategically ask people to quarantine, to stay out of the public sphere until 14 days have passed, when we know then that they should be free of the disease. Did I answer your questions and explain that process thoroughly, Madam Chair?
Mr. Huff, I think you gave a good description. I will leave answering the questions to whether or not members have their hands raised, and I see there are several. So Senator Klein is first, and then Senator Kiffmeyer.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Huff. I thought that was a really good explanation of contact tracing. Actually, we were just having this discussion about what does it actually look like, what does it do, and why do you do it? And I don't think you could have answered that with any more clarity. What was especially interesting to me is to be reminded that this is already part of your daily work. While you were speaking, I quickly Googled Minnesota reportable diseases, and you quickly get a list of more than 50 illnesses for which we're already doing this process, and presumably Minnesotans have experienced that and have not felt that their privacy was infringed upon and have not been really aware that this is the good work of the department. The diseases include some rare ones like leprosy and rabies and tetanus and tuberculosis. I think people can see why you would want to do some follow-up if you had a person with that diagnosis in your community. It also includes some more common ones like meningitis and shingles. And again, so this is happening daily on illnesses that affect our community, and you've been able to do it with effectiveness and apparently without complaint. So thank you for the explanation.
And then I have Senator Kiffmeyer and Senator Nelson. Senator Kiffmeyer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, Mr. Huff, I appreciate your explanation as well. It was really really insightful, and especially good to hear it directly from a representative at your level from the Department of Health. So I really, really appreciate that much. One of the things you said, though, Mr. Huff, was in regards to the testing. And it seems to me that in the early stages, I can really understand it. However, right now, this is very widespread already. Matter of fact, so many asymptomatic don't really have a good handle on just how widespread or what the connection is. There's been no, that I know of here in Minnesota, where we've taken a population and tried to get a good handle on that testing and do some extrapolation of that data. Again, those are guesses, but so is all the modeling guesses as well. Educated nonetheless, but they still are. And so once you have something that's fairly widespread like this, I'm just wondering of the effect, because many of these other ones, when you think of some of these diseases that Dr. Klein well mentioned, are very close contact, very intimate contact for the most part. However, in this particular one, we're talking about being within 6 feet, some of these other things, but there isn't, 6 feet for 30 minutes. Just my question is, you're talking about doing it very widespread. At this stage, we've already are into it 7, 8, 9 weeks or so. Can you talk about the effect of that when it has already been out this long and is so many asymptomatic? How are you going to find that? And then also, if you would address the issue of doing a controlled area where you ask people voluntarily, of course, and test everybody, just symptoms or not, to somewhat get a handle on how many in a general population could you do that. And I've seen it done in other countries, a few other places, but not have heard one here in the state of Minnesota. If you could address those two issues.
Mr. Huff?
Madam Chair, Senator Kiffmeyer, to your first question, you're right. It is much more difficult to use the public health interventions when we have a pandemic, when a disease is as widespread as it is. Unfortunately, those are the only tools we have available to us. There is no treatment, there is no vaccine, there is no cure for this disease. We know that a certain percentage of the population that contract this disease will die. As a result, we want to use every tool that we have available, even if it is a tool that's normally we would use when the disease is much less spread. The fact is, we are where we are. And if we look just in public health history, back to past pandemics and past epidemics, and if we look at today, what other states are doing, what other countries are doing, the best tool we have, short of asking everyone to stay home and asking everyone to close businesses, short of that, the best tool that we have is testing, followed by contact tracing and asking people to isolate and quarantine. It is a difficult tool to use. I absolutely acknowledge that. But at this point, it is the best and one of the only tools we have available for us. To your second.
Senator Kiffmeyer, continue.
No, he's going to my second point, so that's fine.
Thank you, Mr. Huff.
Madam Chair, Senator Kiffmeyer, could you rephrase your question for me again, please? I want to make sure I don't miss it.
You bet, Mr. Huff. That was a little bit long for. So the question I have, and it's actually better to have had your answer, but right now we're testing only the very ill, generally with heavy symptoms. And so our pool of testing is rather skewed, you might say, because we don't have that large circle that tells you we've narrowed it down into this very, very small pool. So it seems to me that what we have going on right now, if we could do an expanded, say a population, a city, a community or somewhere that might be somewhat representative, or you could choose 2 different ones and literally test everybody within that, voluntarily, of course, test everybody within that. And then from that, you may have a greater sense, because now you are not just testing those who are very ill or very sick, you'd have a larger sense of the asymptomatic, not asymptomatic, variety of pieces of information that you would gather from that. That I understand what you're saying, the tools at hand, but I think the second tool is a scientific study of doing that. And from that, so you don't have to test 5 million people, you can test a few thousand in a particular area. So could you address the plans to do that? It seems reasonable to me, but I'd like to hear from you.
Mr. Huff.
Madam Chair, Senator Kiffmeyer, you're exactly right. We have, from what we're learning about this disease, is we can have a relatively high percentage of folks who are asymptomatic spreaders or carriers of the disease. And so we do want to get a better idea of the prevalence of the disease, both in symptomatic and asymptomatic individuals. To do that, we do need to do broader scale testing, not just of people who are presenting themselves as symptomatic. We do have plans to do that. We're developing those now, both plans within the Minnesota Department of Health with our research scientists, but also with the Mayo Clinic and with the University of Minnesota. We are also looking at the data that we're gathering from some of these targeted areas, some of these which Senator Abler has mentioned, as these high-risk areas, such as food processing plants, prisons, congregate care settings, where we are testing much broader groups of folks. So you're exactly right. We want to use a broader testing strategy to look at how many people are asymptomatic that actually have the disease. That helps us understand the disease better and helps us better target our mitigation strategies and our public health intervention strategies. It doesn't take the place of the testing broad scale. As you know, we had previously been limited by the number of tests we have. We still don't have enough tests to test all the people that are asymptomatic in the state. We still have those priorities, but as we expand our testing, we're going to be doing more expansive surveys and studies, as you have outlined.
I have other questions, Madam
Senator
Chair, but I know others do too.
Actually, Senator Kiffmeyer, have no more questions for Mr. Huff, so we are back to the A14 amendment. Senator Abler, to your amendment.
Well, thank you, and I appreciate the discussion, and I hope that people see this as a respectful dialogue. It would have been easier just to incorporate it, and I think now having discussed it, I think we understand it. So with that, maybe I'll just, if I could just move the A14 to get the bill in order, that would be, I think, a good idea.
Okay, members, unmute, turn on your video. We are amending the A11 amendment, which has not been adopted, with the A14 amendment. So members, okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed say no.
No.
Okay, and with that, members, the A14 to the A11 is adopted.
So, Madam Chair.
Yes, so now Senator Abler, we are to the A11. Remember, and members, I had Ms. Strand send the A2 to your inbox so you know what the underlying language is that we're talking about. We're deleting everything with the A14, but I just wanted that to be at the top of your inbox so that you have all the pieces that you want for the conversation. So Senator Abler, to the A11 as amended.
And thanks. And maybe just, and I think this is a really good discussion. And I would not want to be with any different group of people than you all to discuss it with. I think that we're really going to be good at this. I just want to remind people why this might be different than the previous contact tracing opportunities the department has had, previous, syphilis and whatever else they're going to be tracing. Pandemics really aren't all that common. The great expansion of interest in public health and the needs, the predominance of the governor's executive orders weighing in so heavily on so many parts of our life, the proposal by the department to add up to 4,000 contact tracers and the concerns about that. And then the idea that privacy matters being a concern that by executive order, which I would have voted against, allowing it word legislation that the governor decided to involve law enforcement in knowing the addresses of people. And so I think the broad, just in terms of just thinking about how this is geared to go and where it's starting to go, there's no conspiracy theory. It's just like, holy cow, look at how big this is getting, and look what people might be losing with their privacy. And so that's what draws me into this discussion. And so people have the right to their health privacy. That's something that Minnesota has held dear against even national efforts to broaden it beyond. And I'm impugning no motives of anybody in this. There's lots of different ways we would all address this, maybe differently. But that's the background for what brings us forward. And so I think a clear statement that people have a list of rights, and maybe it's duplicative, and maybe, Mr. Huff, there's no thought to quarantine people away, but stuff happens, and there's certainly a lot of people's fear about that drives a lot of the actions, I think, of the department and the governor, which would perhaps generate some of the fears that we have about people being invited to be locked up. Just one thing else on the contact tracing bit. I was aware of an individual who I will not disclose the name at all, but there was a COVID case, and this person actually had touched a counter and was asked to stand down for a good amount of days or weeks. So I think there's what Mr. Huff means and what the department intends, and then it's how things get carried out. And I think that's the purpose for this bill. And so with that, those are my opening and middle comments. So thank you, Madam
Thank
Chair.
you. And members, we have Senator Marty and Senator Klein, but I do have a public a testifier. So if I could ask Mr. Bentley Graves next to speak to the A11 as amended, and then we're going to go to questions. Mr. Graves, welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, members. Thank you, Senator Abler, for that background and that discussion. I just had the chance to kind of catch up with some of this language today, and obviously with the A14 amending the A11 made further changes. But as you'll note, there are several sections in the language that bring into view the role that employers may play in testing for COVID-19, and that's something that we're hearing more and more about from our members. Appreciate the changes made in the A14 with a couple of sections that were removed. That certainly helps to clarify the intent of the bill and the responsibilities that would otherwise be left to employers. I would note though that there still would be remaining some questions, I think, about the interaction of the language in this bill and some of the guidelines and requirements that employers are already to be operating under, whether that's with regard to the EEOC, the CDC, some of the governor's current executive orders. Absent this legislation, there is already a fairly, as was mentioned before by Senator Abler, a fairly robust set of employer responsibilities when it comes to issues like this. And so just trying to kind of get a better sense of the implications of some of this language on some of those responsibilities that employers currently have. But certainly recognize the underlying goal of the language here to highlight the issues of personal privacy. But again, wanting to balance that with, particularly from the employer's perspective of keeping their workplaces safe and keeping their employees safe. And again, recognizing the roles and responsibilities they otherwise have under other guidance, particularly from folks at the federal level, again from the EEOC, the CDC, but then also, again, as those things interplay now with some of the requirements that are on businesses under existing executive orders. So again, very much appreciate the changes that were made in the A14. I think we still would have some questions about the interplay of some of the language that's left, particularly in paragraph 5. And just kind of would like to have a better understanding of how far that language goes. And then also in subdivision 4, paragraph A, that's just how an employer might comply with that, as well as some of the other requirements they have under other federal rules and guidelines. So, but I appreciate the opportunity to add that perspective. You know, I've sort of picked up a lot more just in the hearing here, and interested in continuing on this conversation that goes along. Again, this is an issue that we've begun to hear more and more about from our members, and just appreciate the opportunity to bring that perspective here this afternoon, and happy to again continue the dialogue going forward on this piece of legislation on this broad topic.
Thank you. And so now we are to the A11 as amended by the A14, and Senator Marty. Questions to the amendment?
Madam Chair. I guess first of all, I know I've carried amendments to the quarantine law in the past. Those are things that are usually best done when we're not in the middle of a pandemic, in a bad situation. But because that's very important, because you are dealing with people's civil liberties and quarantines, and it's a very touchy thing. And we do have some good civil protections for people in the law existing. I haven't compared how they work with the ones in Senator Abler's bill amendment as amended, but I guess the bottom line overall thing isn't the privacy things in here. It strikes me as that this is an entirely different, well, it's entirely different than the A2 amendment was. This is one that's not really a contact tracing bill under your amendment. It's basically employers can do some contact tracing of these various employees. The trouble I have is if we're going to go to the difficulty and the expense of contact tracing, which the medical experts all seem to say is a major part of opening up the state, it does strike me that we want to do a good job of contact tracing them. And I mean, just the idea in your A11, you're specifying these are at-risk individuals. And I don't have it right in front of me. Yeah, people who work in healthcare facilities, long-term care, et cetera. Well, if I work in a long-term care facility, I can understand why I'm one at high risk to it and how contact tracing for me might matter. But if my spouse might have been exposed to it and you're not going to do contact tracing with anybody because my spouse isn't working in a long-term care facility, you're going to miss a lot of it. It seems to me that the whole point of granted an extensive contact tracing proposal that the administration was interested in, and I think that actually A2 conceives of I assume not huge at the beginning, but something that might scale up a lot, is that we're going to track down wherever we're finding it spread to do contact tracing on each case. And that's a whole different thing than just trying to say, well, if you work at this facility where you might be at risk, go do contact tracing for you. Seems to me we should be interested in contact tracing for anybody who's been exposed to it, anybody who has it. The people they've had contact with are the ones we want to notify and alert. So, Senator Abler, I guess my concern overall is that this thing sort of guts the whole concept of contact tracing, says instead, well, we'll have some employers do some contact tracing if they want to do so. That's a totally different approach and not one I'm comfortable with. In other words, I don't see your biggest change as being adding some privacy protections. I think your biggest change is you're saying we don't want to do contact tracing except in these very few specific cases.
Senator Abler?
Madam Chair, I think privacy is a really big deal. And I think I am totally thinking the department can contact trace whom it likes already. And so I don't see this as having much impact on that at all. We had a bill up in testimony. If you listen to the scope of the discussion last time, it was actually quite vague, not defined very well. And they were trying to have us give them $8 million a week. And I think that that's a lot, $400 million a year. And if it carries past the first of the year, it's going to be general fund. And so we did not forbid them to do that, but this just says if you're going to do it, please protect the rights of the people. And here's some money for small employers. And I think it's a very practical bill. And maybe it's certainly a step back from the huge expansion that was there, but I think it respects the integrity of the department to do their testing and just put some guardrails on it and lets them go forward with it.
And Senator Marty, this doesn't say you can only test in high-risk sites. It says that those have to be the priority, which I think is generally agreed upon. And we just want to make sure that the public understands under the governor's authority and with federal money, the legislature cannot shape a contact tracing program unless we move language forward. And so I think what Senator Abler is trying to do with this language is to shape that program so that we have a say and that our priorities end up as part of the end solution. Senator Klein has actually, Senator Marty, your hand is still up.
Yes,
Senator Marty.
Yes, I did want to follow up on that because my concern, I don't disagree with Senator Abler that what the department has presented so far was unclear. I had a lot of questions about it. I thought that was the point of today's hearing hey, we want more information from Department of Health, what they're envisioning, and should we be, the talk of how many thousand contact tracers might be necessary, I don't think that starts day one. And do we start with a smaller amount of money and start going forward? Seems to me those are the questions we ought to be asking. This doesn't, the legislation with the A11 on it, delete everything amendment strikes me that says, okay, we're not going to do anything. We're not going to provide funding. We're not going to be providing anything else. If the department wants to do it, hey, they got to do it out of whatever funds. I'm not sure how, but it seems to me if we want to have more legislative oversight and involvement in it, we ought to be trying to find out more information from them and try and shape the program that way. And I'm not saying that privacy protections aren't important. I strongly agree they are. I'm not sure yours are better or worse than the ones in existing law, but my overall point was not on the privacy protections in your amendment. My overall point was that yours seems to be saying, we're not going to deal at all with the bigger program. We're just going to say we're going to have this one little portion and privacy protections for it. But it seems to me you forgot the privacy. You put the privacy in there, but you forgot the contact tracing program.
Senator Abler.
Sorry for the delay. I don't think so at all. If you're going to have a program that people are going to trust, that they're going to want to be a part of, they have to feel like it's safe. And just very frankly, beyond the scope of this bill and so many executive orders and actions that have come out that have been kind of done privately and what's going to come next, people are on the edge of their seat about what tomorrow is going to hold, are we going to be open or not? The confidence level, I think, is not very high. And I think you want to first keep the confidence tight so they know that they're going to be safe. So that what Mr. Huff said, which is I'm probably codifying the common practice of what they think they would do. That'd be great. The department can already expand this with a limitless amount of money that they have from the federal government. So I don't want to repeat myself, Madam Chair and Senator Marty, but I think this is a prudent way to proceed. I think people will accept it and maybe involve themselves even more in helping to keep us safe.
And Senator Marty, I can go back to you, but I do have Senator Klein as well. So Senator Klein.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Senator Abler. And actually, I like the idea of a privacy bill of rights. I think both Senator Kiffmeyer and Senator Abler raise a good point that this current expansion of contact tracing would be a little different from the diseases that we've been doing in the past because it would be on a larger scale. I shared something with Senator Benson from the American College of Physicians where they recommend contact tracing as an essential tool in sort of our approach to this illness. And they also want us to incorporate significant privacy protections with that, knowing that this will be an expansion of contact tracing beyond what Minnesotans have been familiar with. So I would actually co-author with you, Senator Abler, a patient privacy bill of rights, something along those lines. I would prefer that we leave the quarantine language out of it because I think that can create conflicts. But I tend to agree with Senator Marty that such a bill should also lend some support to the concept that we as a legislative body support the tactic and idea of contact tracing as an effective solution for this problem going forward. You've encouraged us to sort of express our voice as a legislative body and not leave it all to the governor. And yet in this scenario, you're almost saying, well, he has the authority anyway, so I'm just letting him take care of it. And so I would encourage us not to drop the ball like that. Let's pick it up. Let's do a privacy bill that also incorporates a legislative imprimatur for contact tracing. And then I want to comment briefly about the number of $400 million a year. That's kind of, I think somebody did it on the back of their napkin last meeting, but we've never really heard testimony from the department or a fiscal note or anything along those lines that that's anything close to what it would cost. So I want us to be cautious about using that number. And then lastly, Madam Chair, I would be appreciative before this is over if we can get the reaction of the department to the A11 as amended.
Okay, absolutely. Mr. Huff, since Senator Klein raised the question, are you prepared to speak to the A11?
Madam Chair, yes, I am.
Mr. Huff, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Senators. I think we do have some concerns with the bill, the Department of Health. I think part of it is whenever we codify something into statute, it does create guardrails, and some of those guardrails are good, and some of those can be overly restrictive. While we definitely agree with the need to prioritize high-risk settings, and we have done that, it is difficult to have just one set codified because as CDC guidance changes, as our own understanding of the disease changes, we want to be able to make those changes. So, for example, the meatpacking plants. 3 months ago, we might not have considered that, but now we are considering that a high-risk site. So I would just ask for the flexibility to be given so that we, with our own professional expertise, with the guidance of the CDC, and then just to be able to evolve with the changing conditions. We right now, no one is required to be tested. The amendment requires written consent. I'm not sure if that's what medical providers actually provide beyond what the HIPAA disclosure that you sign when you go to your doctor or your healthcare provider. Usually that's a verbal consent.
Mr. Huff,
yes.
Mr. Huff, just so you know, we do require signature for release of health information.
Yes. I think I'm referring to on the A11 line 2.7 says without the written consent of the individual being tested. And I would have to defer to what medical practice is. I'm not a clinician. But I'm not sure you provide written consent to every test that you go to. But I just defer that as a question for perhaps from the physicians on the committee. In line 2.12, when we're talking about a Tennyson warning, normally we don't provide a Tennyson warning when we're actually doing testing. That would require the nurse or doctor to give a Tennyson warning when they're actually taking the sample. We do provide Tennyson warnings always when we do contact tracing. We are concerned about the employer contact tracing. I think as Senator Marty outlined, the purpose of contact tracing from the Minnesota Department of Health is that you have one group that has all the information, that all that information is protected under data practices and data privacy law, but that our epidemiologists can look at its entirety. So they can say, oh, this person connects to this person, which connects to this person. Therefore, we know where this transmission pathway started, or where maybe we don't know, and that's even more concerning. So having employers do testing is concerning for us. We lose that ability. We don't want to share private data with an employer. We can't share private data to an employer without written consent unless we go for a commissioner's order. And that would confound our ability to effectively do contact tracing. We do have concern on some of the changes that it makes to the commissioner's authority. As I have expressed to you, we're very, very careful in using the broad authority given to the public health commissioner, but there are instances when it is needed. So, for example, under this bill, if someone tested, say, a nurse in a long-term care facility tested positive and refused to share that information, currently, we have the ability through a commissioner's order to share the information with that long-term care facility so that we can find who was that nurse working with and who else was that nurse in contact with so that we can move to protect those very vulnerable people. Under this bill, we would not be able to do that. We would not be able to contact the employer and let them know that one of their nurses is currently infected with COVID. So that is
Mr. Huff, unless the nurse consented.
Yes, exactly. If the nurse did not give their consent, then we would not be able to provide that information to the employer, and therefore that nurse could continue to infect some of our most vulnerable people.
So, but Mr. Huff, what if that nurse doesn't want her information shared? Then what do we do? Because right now she doesn't get a choice. So if she goes to her private healthcare provider and tests positive, that information sent to MDH, and that information can be shared with her employer. Is that correct?
Under a commissioner's order, which is very rare, we do not just share private data unless there is a compelling public health reason. So, for example, we recently had a food plant where the employer paid to have a healthcare provider do testing. Now, they failed to get written consent from the employees. Those data were sent to MDH, and the employer requested those data, but we did not release them. There was no compelling public health reason to release those data to the employer. So we only do this in rare situations, mostly when folks are dealing with vulnerable populations. And we do have people that refuse to share with their employer. And we believe strongly that the Commissioner of Health needs to have the authority to share that information if it will protect health and life of people.
Okay, Mr. Huff, I'm going to keep moving. Let's see, Senator Klein, I see your hand is down. Do you feel your questions were answered? Okay, thank you. Senator Kiffmeyer, then Senator Jensen.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Huff. I appreciate all this discussion. The one thing that I would say that I realize probably more is that we kind of reference some of what you normally do, what the Department of Health normally does, and yet reference to that this pandemic. And it is very, very different because right now, what people fear is what they've seen happening, the National Guard, law enforcement, and this news right now and information comes from the world, from the region, from national. So it's not like maybe in years past where it was held much more confidentially. So we're not in a vacuum here, and that the governor has emergency powers that are very, very powerful. And so I think during this time, the contact tracing and also the potential they feel power of law enforcement to do this, the National Guard, other type of other powers right now, I think tip the scale so heavily in the government side that even though it is stated, Mr. Huff, of what the Department of Health normally does or what they do, we're entering now into a quite not normal, a quite very different situation has been referenced. So I think this is really important to recognize the context of which we are right now. And so people even feel sometimes, so we pass this bill and the governor's next executive order could just exempt or waive or do some of these things. I think that's their concern, their sense of the current normal and the current protections and the law and the Constitution and other things they feel are just kind of not there for them. And their trust and their expectation then is so very much affected by that. So I think it's very important that we add context to the discussion right now. And I think it's that we don't think anybody's bad intent or anything like that. But this is the reality of the circumstances that we are in right now. And people are not ignorant of those information. So while I appreciate your good intentions, that's a real concern right now of that context.
And Mr. Huff, I will say when the governor decided to send people's addresses to law enforcement, I thought that fundamentally undermined our ability to build trust with the people that we might need to test in the course of this pandemic. If somebody maybe has had marginal contact with the law, or maybe there's a warrant out for their arrest, maybe they just won't get tested because they don't want their name being sent to law enforcement. And so this is not, I think some of the concern is not in isolation, and it's not from watching the media too much. And so I hope that as we continue to talk about the right to privacy and the importance of public health, people won't misconstrue the level of concern some folks have about their personal medical information being shared. As careful as we would like to be, once it's out, it's gone. I'm going to go to Senator Jensen, then Senator Matthews.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the discussion. Please excuse my dog, but he's not on a golf course. Anyway, there was a paper done by Daniel Gilmore with the ACLU on April 16th. And what he commented in his paper was, he said traditional contact tracing techniques carried out through in-person interviews are labor-intensive and often slow compared to fast-moving pathogens like coronaviruses. And he also went on to say that while many of these systems will offer public health benefits, they may cause significant risks to privacy, civil rights, civil liberties. And if such systems are to work, they must be widely adopted, but they won't happen if they don't enjoy strong trust within the population. And I think that's part of what we're addressing here too, is this isn't something that's as easily diagnosed. I think back to Dr. Larry Brilliant, who worked a lot with the World Health Organization in the 1970s to help eradicate smallpox in India. And he made two comments that were really salient to him. He had an interview with Al Franken a few weeks ago, I think. And he said that two things were present there that aren't here. One is that the disease is readily diagnosed. The smallpox, the fever and the rash present, and it's at that point that infectiousness begins. And that's clearly very different from COVID-19. And he also went on to say that we had a smallpox vaccine available. So we had that treatment as well. In this situation, we've already had public trust breached by having an executive order that sent out addresses of people with active COVID-19 in the household. And that was a little bit of I think, a shot across the bow for a lot of folks. I think a lot of people said, wow, we're really doing that. Typically, contact tracing works best when there's more of a laser-focused precision attack. And that's not what we have here. We've got a disease that in 40 to 50% of people, they won't even know they had it. We have another 40 to 50% of people that will skate through it and potentially attribute it to a sinus infection or a common cold or an influenza. And even public health officials have acknowledged that there's probably been a commingling of influenza and COVID-19 presumptive diagnoses. So I think we're dealing with entirely a different situation. And then on top of that, our tests are problematic. Governor Walz and Commissioner Malcolm have worked hard to get a program laid out, but right now, we're not satisfied with the false positives and the false negatives. We're not satisfied with the sensitivity and specificity. The FDA has recently pulled off several vendors that had been allowed to sell within the state, even without an EOU. And that might not be the right acronym, but it's basically their stamp of approval on the quality. That hasn't, there's only been a handful of those. Quidel, I think, has just come out with a test that's going to be used in CRISPR technology, but we're really not at a place where we can speak with definitive precision and say, yes, this serology test will show that these people are immune, and this PCR test will show this, and this CRISPR test will show this. So we're in a tough place, and we've got a few days left in the session. So what we're trying to do is put together a bit of a patient manifesto that says, these are your rights. We don't want to undercut the ability for the Department of Health to do its good work when that good work can actually demonstrate fruits of their results. In the present situation, there's many far more knowledgeable epidemiologists than I could shake a fist at that say the horse is out of the barn. An aggressive, all hands on deck kind of a program isn't going to do anything. But we still have the opportunity to do the laser focused kinds of things, whether we're talking about long-term care facilities, whether we're talking about specific businesses, certainly the JBS, the pork plants, those kinds of things. So I think we want to definitely take advantage of the tools and the capabilities that the Department of Health has. And thank you, Dr. Huff, for your presentation. But the place we're in right here, I feel more of a compelling need to protect the public than I do to expand the Department of Health's capability. So I'm going to continue to listen, Madam Chair and Senator Abler, but at the present time, I've heard nothing that's compelling. And I think that there, in regards to expanding the Department of Health, but I think there's something very, very urgently in need when it comes to protecting the individual and their rights, because I think we have every right to wonder if those rights haven't been compromised to a significant degree already and might not be further compromised without necessarily an intentionality. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, members. And we are still on the A11. Senator Matthews is next on my list. Senator Kiffmeyer, your hand is still up. If you want to go after Senator Matthews, leave your hand up. If you have asked all your questions, please put your hand down. Senator Matthews.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have couple questions that I'd like to ask the department. I was going to ask for their comments to the A11 as well. I'm grateful that we got those. But I do want to echo some of what my colleagues have said about the importance of this trust, how it's being perceived out in the public and in my district. Yes, I do think it was a misstep in the order to share names with law enforcement. I think a good way, if we're moving to some kind of testing capability, the administration really needs to reconsider that one. And if there is an executive, if the legislature doesn't pass a model that the administration wants, and there's an executive order on Tuesday or Wednesday after we're out of session that sets up the 4,200 tracers and pays the amount of money that seemed very large from the information we gathered at last week's hearing, I think that's going to further damage a lot of people's trust. And there will be some people that will like that will support it. But this is one of those scenarios where this chain will only be as strong as its weakest link. And if you damage the trust with a large segment of the population, which you are going to do, it will thoroughly hamper your efforts everywhere across the board. And I want you to be aware of that. But to the department, after last week's hearing, when the initial proposal was laid out and a lot of unanswered questions and things that we still needed to work out, I went and over the weekend, I had some conversations with some of the counties in my district. The counties, all of them that I talked with, informed me that the Department of Health had recently instructed them to start training and preparation for being responsible to do the tracing within their jurisdiction. They sounded very surprised, as surprised as I was, hearing that there was now a proposal to add 4,200 people to the job at the state level, because they had started the preparation already utilizing the local employees, the local resources, and utilizing the training at their fingertips to start moving in that direction. So I'd like the department to answer what the instructions were given to the counties. Was it widespread around the state? And how that is seeming to fit in whatever form of a tracing proposal that you're wanting to put out now, because it seems like a reinventing the wheel to me. I think we should pivot more away from what a program should look like in this legislation, because I think we've got really strong form of that at the ground level already in our local governments. And I think we do need to put strong protections in place on the privacy side in order to help rebuild the public trust that's going to be crucial going forward. So if the department could answer kind of how they've been interacting with local governments recently, how that goes together, I'd appreciate that.
Mr. Huff, to working with local public health on testing, tracking, and tracing. And I've heard different things. Local public health wants to be flexible and responsive to their community. They don't want to be told what to do. So please speak to Senator Matthews' concerns.
Madam Chair, Senator Matthews, thanks for raising that question. Our partners in local public health are vital to achieving our public health goals in Minnesota. We are one public health system, whether it be the state or the locals. What we did as a state, knowing that our capacity was basically tapped out, is we reached out to all local public health organizations and invited them. We didn't tell them, we invited them to join us in contact tracing and asked that if they would like to participate in that, and we would love for them to let us know so that we can train their staff to do so. And we had kind of a train the trainer model. Many local public health groups took us up on that, many counties and cities. Some, just because of capacity, said, love to help. We have one staff person and we just can't do that. That's completely understandable why the state is here. We, through that, have been able to add significant numbers, probably doubled the number of people that we have contact tracing through partnering with local public health. Now, that's not free either. The local governments are paying for that and pulling people off of their own jobs to do this. We have also we are working with the University of Minnesota Medical School and the University of Minnesota School of Public Health to have public health students and medical students join us as contact tracers. Blue Cross Blue Shield of Minnesota graciously volunteered free of charge many of their folks to provide support as well. The goal through these measures is to increase the number of contact tracers from 100, which is where we were at the end of April, to by the beginning of June to have almost 800 people working. And this is just through our existing networks, partnerships with University of Minnesota, Blue Cross Blue Shield, local public health, and redeploying internal states agency staff. Does that help answer your question, Senator?
Madam Chair and
Senator
Mr.
Matthews.
Huff, thank you. It does help shed light on it. I think then the question needs to be asked, does that mean that you can drastically shrink the size of your proposal down to something a lot smaller, a lot more manageable, that can be presented as we will have a core ready to go help where it's needed, whether it's a county with one or whether it's a county that has a higher surge than what that particular county can have capacity for, rather than coming with a proposal saying, we're taking the words that were used to describe last week's model, we want to set up another large government agency in a matter of a few days, which sets off warning bells to a lot of people. So is that going to help kind of temper and moderate your proposal, being able to utilize local relationships?
Mr. Huff, will you hire fewer people because you're getting these other resources?
Madam Chair, Senator Matthews, these other resources definitely take off the number that we have to hire new. Yes. If I may, Senator Benson, describe some of the decision making that we're going through right now to decide how many people do we need for this job. It really depends on how quickly we're able to respond to people who test positive. We are right now working with, through our testing collaborative with all the healthcare organizations, working with how do we make sure we get the best information? Do we have accurate phone numbers for people so that we can call them? Will they answer the call? Very difficult when people don't answer their phone. We want to make sure that we, if someone tells us no, that's one thing. We can scratch them off our list. But if they don't answer, then we have to keep calling. So we want to make sure we have good data, good information from healthcare so that we can follow up with people. And we want to make sure we have it really as fast as possible. If we're able to get really fast information and accurate information, we probably only need about 1,500 contact tracers. So I just mentioned how we're getting to 800. So that's another 700 that we would need to hire. However, and this is where that larger number came from, we have folks that are going to be in a high risk area. So for example, someone who works in a long-term care, or someone who's in a community where there's a known outbreak, or someone who works in some other sensitive sector. We want to contact them immediately if they present as symptomatic. We don't want to wait for the lab test to get processed, which can be days. By the time the sample's collected, shipped to the lab processes it, enters into our computer system, downloads to the epidemiologist or contact tracer for the phone call. That can take a number of days. The reason we have that really high number is if we were to contact people, these high risk folks immediately once they were tested, so that we can say, hey, if you're symptomatic, please stay home. And who else have you been working with or in close contact with? So we can call them and ask them to stay home. That's where you get that really large number of up to 4,000, 4,200.
Thank you, Mr. Huff. We're going to be late for caucus here, so I mean no disrespect. Senator Kiffmeyer, you wanted to ask one more question, and then I'm going to need to make a decision here. So Senator Kiffmeyer.
Well, Madam Chair, I've heard a lot of debate today, and I don't know that the language in its current shape is necessarily want to be. I think there's a lot of consensus over the Bill of Rights, which is really important. Some of the other language may need more work on it. But I would say probably what I'm hearing from Dr. Huff is even somewhat more concerning, because the counties have told me as well, and you can say we ask or we want you to volunteer. And especially Minnesota people, they take that a little more seriously than maybe others do. And it's like law enforcement saying, would you park over here, please? Really? I don't think that was a choice. And so the same thing there. And I have questions about the quote, kind of this voluntary thing. And so I just have those concerns. And especially when I feel like already with sharing addresses, we've breached already that trust and that norm. And so the Bill of Rights is even more crucial. So those are just my comments. My other question is, what are you going to do, Ms. Dr. Huff, when those local folks that have been so gracious to volunteer at your request, when they can't, and they're going to need those employees instead of taking them away from other kinds of duties they're customarily doing, and you aren't going to have them anymore? Are you going to commandeer them? Are you going to release them? What are you going to do?
So, Mr. Huff, I don't think the folks at MDH realize it, that their requests are not suggestions to a lot of folks. Hospitals feel like they have to comply. Public health feels like it has to comply. And so to Senator Kiffmeyer's point, I'd like to have some understanding of where you're pushing people, but we need to go to Senator Marty. So I'm going to, Senator Kiffmeyer, if I could, I'd like to go to Senator Marty and Senator Abler, closing comments, and then we're going to be done. So Senator Marty, you're the lead, and Senator Abler is the author of the amendment before us, and you will be the last two speakers. Senator Marty.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I want to make it clear, I'm not criticizing the idea of more privacy protections. I think Mr. Huff's point that, like, one of them requiring written consent before you do testing is one more thing in a very fast moving situation that people are going to say in a couple of months, why we put in more bureaucracy before you can do a test? We're not doing that. So I think the privacy things ought to be worked out. I always see that more as Judiciary Committee issues, but fundamentally what I wanted to point out was that I assumed we were going to be doing what I think was still a very ill-defined what kind of a contact tracing program we were going to do. And the bill originally coming into today was the contact tracing program, for better or for worse. It was one. And the A11 is basically saying, well, no, we're not going to do anything about that. We're simply saying if the agency wants to have a contact tracing program, then they have to do these privacy protections, which for good or for bad should be there. Because I think we definitely can work on strengthening the privacy protections. I'm not sure that, Senator Abler, what you have in there are the right ones to be added or that it's worded right, which is one of the reasons I think it ought to go to judiciary to deal with that. But for today, my only concern was I thought we were going to be working out a contact tracing program. And I think we just pushed it off the side and said, we're not going to worry about that. But if the department wants to, then this. And I was not, you may have intended that, but it struck me as a bait and switch kind of thing, that we're not talking about contact tracing. we're talking about if they want to do this. If we leave it to the administration to do it, then we want to put this one little provision in there. And I hope I'm not misrepresenting it, but that's what it seems to be.
Senator Marty, that is what happened because I did not communicate early and often, and I'm sorry. I
It's okay.
don't want to bait and switch this committee. So thank you for raising that with me so that I will try to remember when significant changes like this are coming, that it's brought to your attention specifically before amendments are posted. So thank you, Senator Marty. We do have work to do. Senator Abler.
Thank you. My computer says my battery is running low, so hopefully I'll be able to finish my short comments. Senator Marty, this has actually become enlightened and changed course, I think would be how I would say this. And I thank you, Madam Chair, for allowing us to have this discussion. I think it's been really helpful. Mr. Huff, I appreciate your comments. And there's a certain casualness about like, yeah, we're just going to ask a few questions. And I think Senator Kiff might have said it pretty well. And maybe you don't realize the power that panel behind you says M health thing is. People are terrified when we get letters from you all. Madam Chair, I don't know your pleasure. I think the question is, where should the decisions get made about this? And this is the right committee to discuss this. And I don't know if you have more another time to go through this, but I think we're really onto something. I think the discussion of privacy, ranging from the ACLU to the standard citizen, is really a worthwhile discussion. So if you would like, I'm happy to have this be laid over and come back another time. I don't know what your pleasure is, Madam Chair, if you want to vote, or it's really your call.
Senator Abler, at this point, I am uncomfortable asking the committee to take a vote after the amount of work that has been done on an amendment, and I'm not going to ask council to do oral amendments on the fly. I think there's some growing discomfort with our understanding of how employers are involved. I do think we need to push back a little bit on the department when it comes to informed consent for the benefit of citizens. And so, Senator Abler, if you would lay the A11 as amended on the table.
Yes, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And I will lay the Senate File 4500 as amended on the table. And members, I have a lot of work to do around this, and I appreciate that Senator Klein, Senator Marty, Senator Abler, and Senator Jensen have been so pointed in what they would like to see coming out of this committee. My laying this on the table isn't because I don't want to do some sort of testing. It's that I want our testing to be something Minnesotans trust. It is important for employers, as they're bringing employees back to work, that they can trust our testing process. But if the employees don't trust when they're being tested, they're not going to be willing to be tested. When we start re-engaging at the school level, understanding how we're going to trust that we know what's going on with this virus. And so we do need some form of testing. But what I see right now in the public is a lack of trust. And so I'm trying to figure out how we do both of those things. And I have some very good people who are absolutely helping. And with that, members, I appreciate the level of work that you put into this. All of our language is on the table. If you have ideas, let's talk about them. I'm going to try to huddle a small group and see if we can have a robust conversation about what a path forward that could have broader support would be. And with that, members, we are late for caucus, and I am adjourning the meeting. Thank you. We are adjourned.
Thank you.